Welcome to a new episode of the Carbon Exposure Project. Today, we're thrilled to host Dominic Lüdin, Chief Growth Officer at Carbonfuture. We'll dive into the evolving landscape of the carbon dioxide removals, or CDR industry, and its pivotal role in achieving net zero. Carbonfuture is at the forefront, developing crucial trust infrastructure to support the growth and scalability of this vital industry. We caught up with Dominic just before Carbonfuture's recent summit in London, a gathering that brought together leading thinkers, project developers, and clients, all committed to forging a sustainable future through durable carbon solutions. Join us as we explore some of the exciting and emerging technologies within the world of CDR and discuss how they complement more traditional carbon credit avoidance strategies. After all, to truly impact our climate goals, we need to both avoid and remove emissions from the atmosphere. Hope that you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project. Dominic, welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project. It's a pleasure to see you again. Obviously, we've known each other for a really long time, but effectively now you're in a really interesting position here in the world of CDR, and I really wanted to pick your brains in terms of what's happening and certainly as this interesting space is heating up. So welcome to London. It's ahead of a summit that you guys are hosting on the CDR side. And yeah, just wanted to obviously have a chat with you.
Big pleasure to be here. Very nice to see you again. And nice to also be back in the market and kind of see people like you that have shaped it since then.
Great, yeah. So tell us a little bit about Carbonfuture and the work that you're doing.
Happy to. So Carbonfuture is trying to build the trust infrastructure for durable carbon removal. And maybe to start with carbon removal, like why is it required, right? We all know that we need to get to net zero. We know that to get to net zero, we need to reduce first, yes, or they need to reduce, but we'll have this about 10 gigatons by 2050 that we do need to remove. Mm-hmm. So how do we get there? So it's really like building that in a quality that we actually makes us get there. So what Carbonfuture is doing is building this digital platform for suppliers. Yep. Monitoring, reporting, verification. Sometimes this whole market is full of jargon.
Yeah,
basically,
lots of acronyms.
Basically, first and foremost, supplier, how can we help suppliers set themselves up for success? So easy data ingestion for the right data, making transparent where carbon is removed from the atmosphere, who transports it along a value chain, who puts it into the ground in a carbon preserving manner, have that full transparency. I'll get to why that is important for the buyer side. In the tail end, there's always like submitting the data also to a third-party verifier, do that seamlessly, so that in the end, high-quality removal credits result, which are important to actually finance the projects. So that trust infrastructure is our bread and butter. The second is to actually bring buyers that have set themselves net zero targets that know eventually they will need a part to remove because we're all a bit in a situation that there's just some emissions we can't physically reduce. So what is the plan there? Because we do have these net zero targets. So giving access to a de-risked supply of carbon removal credits is what we do, typically with long-term commitments or long-term contracts with the likes of Microsoft or Swiss Re to really channel the funds required for this supply to actually to come online.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's fantastic. I love the words that you use. It's a trust infrastructure.
Yes.
Which is, I think, a real recognition of maybe some of the mistakes that have occurred in VCM or carbon markets 1.0.
Yeah.
And now with people talking about carbon markets 2.0. It's funny, and I think we were talking about it off camera, but you've been around from carbon markets 1.0 since the early days.
Yeah.
And then you've spent a lot of time in tech.
Yeah. And
then you've come back to carbon markets 2.0.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of background in terms of what your journey so far, because I think it's fascinating.
My journey, there's hardly a red line, but yes, so like 2008 was actually the moment when I got into the carbon market first.
Yep.
And what I really loved about it is, I mean, personally, I don't know, I grew up in Switzerland, like we tend to have nature, like we go less, get lost in mountains because there's a lot to offer in Switzerland, but like natural beauty is one. Mm-hmm. So that was always around. And I moved to China after my studies, went into the startup scene, and there it was kind of like, it just showed that, you know, nature is not always granted. And I could mention China, I could other countries. Yeah, for me, that was kind of like, okay, I want to work on this. And that was also the moment as well when the market mechanisms came up to solve that problem. To me, that was an incredibly important combination of two things. A purpose I burn for, And I feel we need to work via market mechanisms to kind of actually also motivate the choir that is not already singing.
Yes.
To put a price on the problem, to make sure that we have a monetary logic that underlies solving the problem at hand, which is kind of to now remove emissions, but it was there also like avoid new emissions, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, that was the market entry, and I loved being in that market for 4 years. That's also
we got to work together at the First Climate.
Exactly.
That's when we first met.
Where I also profited a lot from, like, you know, like you were even earlier, and it just kind of.
No, it was my early days as well. That was my kind of like entry school, like my university degree in college.
So mature, right? Like, or old.
It just.
So that gave me 4 years of exposure, and I think to me, like back then, it was relatively politically driven with the Kyoto targets, and when they were not renewed, it felt almost a little bit premature, and like, you know, a lot of the projects that you tried to enable, price points were not there anymore, and it felt a bit like an anticlimax. Yeah. So I went back into software, did two. I'm not a software engineer, so I'm always working on business development product in software startups. But basically went back into that sphere, worked a bit on different problem sets, but with technologies, with data. And what I noticed after 10 years is just like this helping mitigate or solve the climate crisis just stays my thing. I want to kind of contribute a little bit to that. And having seen then actually that also now carbon removal as the third necessary puzzle piece in a net zero strategy is nascent, needs to have some wings attached to kind of these technologies. I felt, okay, this is a cusp again. This is at a different maturity, I think, also of the market. I feel, yes, the political part is shaping up here as well, has some parts already. I think there's much more investment by the civil society, by companies. Mm-hmm. So I think there's more puzzle pieces that have a good foundation of this market. So I was like, okay, I want to work back on that. And I think what for me was also important, and then I stop, I know I babble a lot, is that seeing also like people from software flocking into this market now, and I would call out, for example, also the Stripe gang, that with the watersheds, with Frontier or whatnot, the mindset that I've seen in software, which I always liked in terms of, okay, you try, you do a review, you iterate, mm-hmm. I think is something that also this market can do more, just to kind of really make sure that, given we're working on a frontier, have these mechanisms to quickly learn, and always with the mindset of like, does it work? If it doesn't quite work yet, adjust, go, right? Because we can't start with perfection because it's novel. Yeah. But
and it's also impossible. It's almost unattainable, but that iteration improves over time, and you start to see those developments.
Yeah, and you have clear guiding principle from the start, right? Like going back to the trust word and how to build for trust. This is the essential fundamental piece for this market. Yeah, because it's
the essential currency.
Yeah,
in a market
that especially is right now mainly voluntary, right? So there's nobody saying like you have to. People do it because they see they see that they want, but you need to be ensured like that whilst you act, at least you don't have negative backgrounds of acting or negative consequences of acting. Yeah. And I think that's why I'm kind of like happy to be back and love to be contributing from the side of Carbonfuture, knowing that this is an ecosystem that works together, right? But I'm happy that we're having this focus on the trust infrastructure.
And that's great. And I think, thank you for that background, but also what you said earlier around this this influx of new, not only entrants and participants coming in with a diverse experience sets, looking at then tackling and addressing the complexities and the problems that underlie any sort of market. It's not a nascent market, as you kind of mentioned, right? You've been in this space since a long time, since sort of around the time that I came in 2008. So it's had some time, but it's in its adolescence, and so it's continuously iterating. What's really great of the kind of the new wave, certainly in the CDR side, is the energy and the palpable kind of, just positivity to just throw resources at this, both financial but also human resources, to tackle the complexity of this problem. And it's just a positivity, and that's really great, because I think that there's a lot of folks who've maybe remained, who feel just very tired, right? Of just trying to carry this weight and trying to, like you said, trying to motivate participation from the folks that weren't I think you use the analogy of the singing in the choir, and I sometimes feel in that camp. But I think I'm always buoyed by the energy of new participants, whether they be young people or folks from diverse kind of streams coming into this space. CDR seems to be really resonating with that. And then the other bit is, like you said, it's a call to action. Because it's voluntary, there's a lot of leaders in this space, and certainly we see that in CDR. You mentioned Stripe, you mentioned Microsoft. There's a number of companies that have made really significant commitments at scale with huge sums of capital that have been really similary towards CDR. And I think that's a really good news story. Oftentimes, certainly in the media, there's a lot of denigration with regards to the imperfection around carbon markets. I had a chat with some folks around that earlier in the day. But I think on the CDR side, there's an optimism that's palpable. And I think, can we break it down in terms of the investment side for last year? I think, CDR FYI has somewhere like $1.7 billion worth of investment across spot, but mostly forward across CDR. That's a great story.
I think so too. And a shout out really also to the colleagues or friends at CDR.FYI. I think it's good to have a service that really tries to kind of capture like what is actually going on in the market, and it just gives transparency also in terms of how much is happening already.
Yeah.
The 1.8 billion investment, yes, was 2013. 23, I just checked begin, because like the nice thing is like these data kind of like every day changes. Today we're already like at 2.8. So it's a massive growth, arguably from a relatively low denominator, but like if you look at the exponential growth, like it's a vastly expanding segment. And I think so this durable solutions it's taken off. We have a long way to go to kind of get to the 10 gigatons. That's beautiful, right? There's a lot to do. If you look at the growth rates, it's already above trend right now. Yeah, it's a long thing to go. And it's wonderful to see also, like, yes, in the beginning there was, companies such as Microsoft, and now I'm probably kind of missing some, but Microsoft, Swiss Re, like there's clubs like Frontier, CDR, the next gen CDR facility,
Alphabet,
ECG, Alphabet. Thank you all of the ones that early on said, okay, we understand this problem, we have made commitments, we need to build for ourselves, and we need to build the capacity for all, because if the capacity is not there, the prices are just going to be unreasonable for anybody.
And they said, and they also understand very well the technology cycles, right? Of those technology curves. They understand they're providing catalytic finance effectively here. Long-term signals as well that are really responsible to help to stimulate the growth of that market, understanding full well that without that, these markets are just ideas.
Yes. Yeah. And do so by acting, right? And by that, they also there's a lot of expertise building there. I love also that a lot of them talk about what they have done, what worked. Yeah, and they also talk about it, just also the mistakes that are happening or the problems that they're encountering, the complexities of the problem set, but they're not dissuaded from participating. I love that notion, because it's, again, positivity. Yeah, and I'm happy like that. I think also like when they talk, it's great. Obviously, you get spotlight on yourself. I actually love that they get also brand effect from that. Yeah, I think that's the whole you point. Actually show leadership. In an extended portfolio of what the carbon market offers now with the durable removal. So that's one. And I think what I'm excited about right now is all of the ones that were in the market early on stay in the market. I haven't seen anybody churn, right? It's really improve. So we're in early cycles, but I think that they've made long-term commitments, and it's demonstrated through the offtakes. You mentioned not only just because of the nascent aspect of a lot of these methodologies, and I want to get into that as well. You talk about durability being the core key driver here around it, and it's the technological sort of removals that play a key role in the long term, but the nature-based removals also play a really important role in terms of helping to achieve scale to reach that 10 gigaton removal sort of trajectory. But it's these long-term commitments, and they're standing by them, which is really fantastic. Yes, absolutely. And actually, because that capital provides certainty and confidence to the risk takers to actually go ahead and try to develop these new technologies, or to innovate and to bring these products to market at scale. Yes. For suppliers, if you have certainty that for typically now 7 years until 2030, you have a revenue stream, you can actually plan. We've seen actually a lot of suppliers also that then add capacity. Yeah. Like one example is a project that went from 40,000 tons to next year is going to have 200,000 tons. Give us an example. Let's elaborate, please. ExoMag Green. That's one of the examples in biochar. It's a Bolivian project. They're very early on in in entering the market, have an operational facility. Biochar then kind of, on the one hand side, you have the durable storage.
Yes.
With the additional benefits in the ground, a moisture level, more moisture level in that sense, like what they've seen indication is like better soil, or better
soil health as well, because of the carbon storage there and the filtration, a whole bunch of other components.
And with some of the long-term agreements that they concluded, and we're happy that we could help them with some of them, is that they have other sites and they kind of build more capacity. Like there's actually 2 projects already. I'm not sure if I can talk about the other plans, but like rest assured, there's entrepreneurs, visionary people that understand also it's a logistics game.
Yes.
That can actually drive that climate impact, given that they know, okay, there is a certain volume, like a certain revenue committed.
Yeah.
And so they can scale. They can scale now.
Yeah.
And that applies to early, further advanced in terms of technical feasibility and can scale right now. Other have a path, and they just see like, are we iterating in terms of like bringing the costs down, bringing the scale up at consistent quality as we predict, and we have a whole portfolio to look at and facilitate. So I personally think this is exciting.
I think it's true, and I think coming back to that point around the support that the early leaders have provided, essentially is providing liquidity in a market where there has been no liquidity, and that liquidity provides not only that certainty to those risk on like the private sector folks that are innovating and delivering on these solutions, but it provides them solvency because they can actually effectively budget and build out these capex effectively investments into these activities. I'm an advisor at a company called BioCare on the biochar side of things, and I see that those developments with Abe and his team, they're doing fantastic. So they have pilot programs, and they start to structure effectively offtake agreements, working with large buyers, and then effectively that helps to underwrite further expansion plans. And so I see the ambition effectively increasing constantly, and it's just an exciting thing. It's like an innovation kind of key flywheel. It's just going to continue to flow.
Totally with you. And I think also I think you hint on it, and I think that's another player coming into the market a lot. Like, I mean, given that you have these multi-year offtake agreement with credible in the sense of credit-worthy buyers, this can be taken as a collateral for financing. So actually, like also
debt finance, sub-debt,
come in and can actually help scale the much larger scales that we're seeing. Exciting. The other effect of these early ones it's always, I think, easier also to a certain part to follow ones that like maybe have the largest science team in-house, have a certain credibility. So following these early movers is also an effect that we see actually encourages now like a second cohort almost of buyers to broaden the buyer base. I think in combination also with, we just need to acknowledge that maybe, not every company has a science team in-house, not every company
or the balance sheet strength to be able to support these things over long term. Certainly the hard to abate sectors tend to have the inverse proportionality to like a Microsoft or tech players that have really strong balance sheets, huge profit margins, and fairly low footprints. Right? That allows them to play this kind of VC kind of type of role in terms of incubating new methodologies and technologies. The folks I'm thinking about shipping, mining, aviation, etc. Fairly weak balance sheets compared to their emissions profile. So for them, it's a pretty heavy lift to do that. So it's really great to see those pioneers effectively opening up the road, and then they can then follow suit. They get the cover effectively. And also the compression, like with regards to pricing, like the beneficiaries of the scale.
So that's almost a bit like the affordability, right? The profit per ton. And again, a shout out to Robert Hoeklund and team for kind of having this drawn together. That's definitely one aspect. I wouldn't give a shout out also like to maybe industries that are a bit more heavy emitters by the nature of them and lower margin, like Mitsui or Ocean Layer, that actually are in the durable sector as well. Starting just like maybe with a smaller part of the portfolio. Another aspect that I want to hint on is more like, if you as a company internally have a lot of science team, you can go in through the complexity of the new technologies and you work yourself.
And you can evaluate, you conduct a DD internally and have the procurement kind of processes. Yeah, but what happens if you don't?
Exactly. So what solutions like Carbonfuture actually want to bring to the market is that you do have a system that works for you in a sense like, hey, the right data is ingested, there is transparency, but not only that, you know, like, okay, what's resulted in the end, but like how has this been transported, have the emission or the transport emission be deducted? Is it really stored in a carbon preserving way or has been used for barbecue, for example? And so have systems that help you do that so that with the sometimes restricted resources and numbers that you have in a sustainability team, for example, where we know like sustainability is this, carbon is this, so I need to like, and reporting in these days is a lot like, how can I really get into the durable space with maybe 10% of my time? And for this, I think we need systems that help you do a due diligence, help you kind of do the data assessment and give you a final answer, have a de-risked kind of supply or a portfolio that as such, always saying that, okay, this is the convenience of here's the importation, here's good to go. If you do want to double click, you double click and you have the whole wealth of data there. So if ever you really want to see the whole thing, it's there too. But you don't have to, right?
That's the trust infrastructure.
That's the trust infrastructure. And we feel that's kind of important because like, you want the convenience, or what we see is you want the convenience of having a trustworthy, measurable system that de-risks the supply that you need.
Yeah.
And you don't have the time or you don't want to kind of dig into like, okay, what does that mean in terms of counterparty? Is the moisture level all right? Like, you know, all the nitty-gritty. But if ever like an auditor comes or maybe you are in, or the market is in the media again, and you want to have just the whole trove of data, you can access it and actually. So that's a bit, I think, what is needed.
That's a necessary cover, effectively, for participation.
Yeah, and just the convenience of getting into the market. Also, maybe if you as a buyer, as a company, don't have a large team that can focus fully on carbon, so that we really enable that part of the market too that do have net zero targets, that eventually will need to have a part of removal whilst doing the reduction. I think we want to be clear that obviously reduction is the core. We want to kind of show that we actually can reduce our emissions from current level. But to net zero, very few industries have it in their full control to do it 100%. So
it's very difficult, especially with internal price. So can I pick you up on that?
Yeah.
Because I think you just outlined it, right? That there's this not an either or type of view. Certainly when I've spoken with you and your team, it's that it's both have an opportunity here in terms of, you mentioned reduction is a key part of a trajectory towards net zero, certainly when you look at the corporate emissions profile, but actual carbon avoidance and reductions, like on the carbon crediting side, also play a similar role because effectively they can be done today and can be done at scale and then provide also the basis for carbon dioxide removals to take on more of a larger quotient, let's say, of the portfolio over the long term, because it's effectively beginning, right? So the supply is fairly constrained still, right? So it's very difficult for a company to effectively say, I'll go 100% removals today, correct?
100% durable removal is it's possible for some volumes, but yeah, the market, I mean, to get to the needs that we foresee, and I think I can allude to I think was a BCT study. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 80 million ton in demand expected by 2030
of removals.
Yeah, so that's
80 million.
I'll check whether but basically a huge growth. We see that the supply comes up quite a bit, but right now, like, it's really starting to build a portfolio of removals towards 2030.
Yeah.
But to your point also, like, you know, ingredient, yes, removal is one puzzle piece, a required puzzle piece in a net zero strategy.
I like that puzzle piece. It's a part of a broader puzzle,
and it's
not exclusionary. It is part of a broader subset of solutions.
We need to. I mean, if you look at the broad picture, IPCC, like, we're roughly, I think, at 50 billion tons of emission. We can probably get down to 10. So that reduction is first, right? So reduction, like whatever we can do in terms of like being smart in terms of the product.
It's possible. We need the right incentives. Without them, we have perversity and we don't have the luxury of time.
We don't. But I think at the same time as we do that, and I would actually, and now it gets maybe a little bit controversial,
Sure.
But at times we're seeing that maybe you do reduction only first and then removal, so a sequential kind of approach.
¿Por qué no los dos? Why not both?
So I think where it comes from at times is like you don't want to have a crowding out, right? The concern is...
Can you elaborate for me on that?
Yeah. I think some concern is like, okay, if I can just remove, then, the reduction, I don't need to do, I just remove and be done with it, right?
That's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
And also the cost is not static.
And I would assume, I would venture think, especially like if you look at the durable removal. So durable is multi-hundred years of storage.
Yeah.
If you look at the cost of these technologies right now, you're well above $100 US per ton, goes up to like 1,000 depending a little bit on which pathway. I think that's more expensive than most of the reduction efforts that can be done. So
by one order of
concern, which I do share, you don't want to take the eye of the price of reduction. I think purely from a monetary perspective, I don't think that's a big concern.
Yes.
That's why I would say go simultaneous. Do build also the removal capacity now. Because on the one hand side, you build
there's a lag. You could also build it, but it might not take materiality in terms of that's issuing the supply immediately.
Yes.
There's an elasticity here with regards to the response.
Yes.
It's not that you build the infrastructure, you switch it on, and voila.
Absolutely.
It's going to take time.
Yeah, and I love that you're taking the macro approach of like that's for us all, right? So absolutely that. If you want to kind of play a concert like in 2030, you can't start building the stadium in 2029, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be very expensive. You need a lot of people, and But you also build expertise, like once you engage, right? Mm-hmm. I think the second effect is like, it's something you have to do, eventually, especially if you obviously set a net zero target. And right now, I think there's not so many companies that are actually positioning themselves in it. The limelight is on a few players. If you get in now and you also want to show like to your employers or so like, hey, we're actually working on it, the brand ROI is higher. And the third point I would mention, and I know like I'm again going a bit out of a limb because there was no crystal ball, but looking a bit at price, like where is the supply of durable removals going to lie 2030? I think it's always good to kind of keep in mind there's a difference between costs and price.
Yes.
The cost of the technology should come down over time, right? Because otherwise it's shitty technology. Sorry, my language.
No, but it's true.
Yeah. So that over time, we need to make sure that these technologies become cheaper over time, right? Because it's not
on a per unit basis.
Yeah, on a per unit basis. Because there's no price. Like price largely is dependent on demand versus supply. And when we look a bit at the prediction towards, just to take a 2030 perspective, it's actually likely an undersupplied market. There's some studies, and I'm again referring to the big consultancies, so like a BCG study and a McKinsey study. I think the gist in general is like strong undersupply, but take undersupply, right? So what happens then is like that typically a price goes up.
It's an inflationary impact because they got more bids than offers. Yep.
So I think then the question is like, okay, it's something that I eventually need to purchase.
Yeah, it's a classic
wait
hedge.
It out, yeah.
It's a classic hedge.
There we go.
Yeah,
I think that's...
And it's from a risk perspective, there's a certainty with regards to the delivery. So early entry price may result in potentially with a depressionary kind of effect over the cycle, but not within that 7-year period. Because I think a lot of these types of activities, certainly when I look at the infrastructure play, like when you look at, you said, DAC in particular, BECS and other types of technologies, they actually take quite a long time to build out.
Build out, sometimes also scale, so... But yeah, and I think this hedge, I like the term, it's a price hedge to a certain extent, and I feel that's actually also in terms of lingo or in terms of positioning removal. I think that's where a sustainability manager and a CFO understand each other. Yeah. I mean, they hopefully understand each other otherwise as well.
Oftentimes they don't. There is a bit of a chasm because that's a really important point, if you'll indulge me.
Yeah,
oftentimes, because the budget is born out of sustainability, it's driven in large part by the metrics of a sustainability team. But as you alluded to earlier, there's this transition that's underway with regards to the voluntary nature and this intersection with compliance markets, especially in Article 6 and other policy initiatives that are effectively accelerating. Those signals then become the domain of Treasury, right? So CFOs not only are approving the budgets to begin with and then kind of leading sustainability teams to go and deliver that and then benefit from the ROI and the marketing position, the leadership, et cetera. But oftentimes it'll then migrate towards a compliance decision, and that's a very rational act. And typically with that, there's an increase with regards to the compliance obligation.
Mm.
It tends to be much broader in terms of scope and reach. And so then it becomes material in terms of costs. And so there needs to be both sides of that equation effectively talking speaking with each other, right? Speaking the same language. Because oftentimes then the rational, let's say, CFO and treasury actor will look for lowest cost. They're like, well, why are we paying for the premium? Yeah. And it's just this understanding around this opportunity hedge.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think the premium, I mean, cost is one. I mean, the other one, I mean, the quality layer is one, right? Obviously, like, we need to make sure the quality is consistently done, and that's, I guess, the trust infrastructure piece, plug again. But on the cost side, I really just kind of see, is it worth kind of leaving that supply chain problem to 2029, let's say, if you have a 2030, risking that you're a price taker, risking that there's actually the supply is just not there anymore, it's committed to others? Or do you kind of start building the capacity now? And simulate. And it's not an all-in, right? You don't have to go all in, but build it up with the additional benefits of expertise, with the additional benefits of brand ROI, with
building and understanding.
Shaper. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that's, to me, is like also a reason why now, right? Like it's don't wait, like, but it's not like in poker, like why now is not like all in, why now, but you start playing your chips because you know you committed, you know you want it. So do.
So Dom, thanks. I think we've unpacked a lot in terms of that conversation. You mentioned durability, and that seems to be the buzzword. And I'm a big advocate of the durability nomenclature. Can I just tell you that as a bit of a fanboy here? Because historically the market on the voluntary carbon market side is focused on permanence. Yeah. And there's this kind of range with regards to permanence. It's not binary, not a permanent or non-permanent. Yeah. It's been permanence around like the spectrum. Yeah. But then durability kind of notion comes in. I think that's a much more apt term. So anyway, that's a bit of semantics, but give us a little bit of a view around the durability and not only the importance of these types of durable solutions, but give us some examples of the types of durability. Because you mentioned early on, it's like, typically kind of 100 years, but there's some that are less and some that are more. Give us some examples, because I'm also just curious about learning about those.
Absolutely, sure. And maybe just as a disclaimer, like, we focus on durable removal because we think there's enough to do here, and we need to kind of scale this thing. Just to iterate the point, like, we think reduction is obviously like, so just not that this is like...
It's not binary, it's not either or. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's really important and responsible to hear that, because oftentimes we're in our echo chambers, and sometimes there are folks with vested interest that want to separate, divide and conquer effectively. And I really want to focus on that point that there is a need for both. That there is camaraderie, there is commonality, and that there's benefits that are shared across both, right? So that it's not either or.
And even in our sales, like, obviously, like, we're trying to kind of pitch as much removal as possible, but am I going to kind of argue against reduction? For sure not. Like, macro first, and then, but we know that there's a lot to build. So that maybe as a context. I'm with you in terms of like the vocabulary of
from a PR perspective is great.
And great. My marketing colleagues are going to kill me for it, but permanence for me is like, permanence is like forever. And I sometimes think in life nothing is forever, but durable I really love, and we take it as multi-100 years at least, right?
Got it.
So in that sense, that you really have a multi-100-year durability. And
so give me some examples of along that spectrum, because it's effectively a spectrum.
Yes.
So we talked about biochar.
Yes.
But and you mentioned enhanced rock weathering, DAC and BECCS and other methodologies. Yeah. Can you put them on a timescale for me?
Yeah, and enhanced rock weathering. So I think the beautiful thing what you just laid out is like there's a portfolio. Yeah. Right? There's a portfolio of different technologies, durable technologies. We need all of them, because not a single one, according to current analysis, can get us to the 10 gigatons or more. So like, we want to make sure that we build a portfolio.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet.
And I hope, and probably there's going to be new technologies that we don't even know yet that will be added to it.
I think there is, and there's a parallel for this. You mentioned McKinsey earlier in terms of their efforts with regards to the Frontier Coalition, et cetera. But when we first started in this market, right? You think about the marginal abatement cost curve, the MAC curve that the McKinsey came out in 2007. That was kind of like seminal kind of work. It shows that as you go up that cost curve, that new technologies then become viable. Yeah. Right? So it's the low-hanging fruit early on. As investments ramp up and as costs becomes more difficult to start to achieve these reductions initially, and then going into migrating to removals, you start hitting certain cost premium. Yeah. Now new methodologies can actually evolve. So now if the price rises significantly, these new technologies can actually emerge because they're viable commercially. Without that, they're not.
That could be quite,
So anyway, so coming back to the spectrum, right?
I mean, so that's kind of I think in terms of how you could probably think of them in terms of durability. So all of them are multi-100 years. If you do have mineralization in concrete or in stone, basically, like, yeah, it's done for,
could be for eons,
for the Stone Age, and like, yeah, so that's. But also, I mean, and I'm hesitant to starting with biochar because, like, I think Carbonfuture is always kind of put into the biochar angle because we started with biochar because we feel.
Yeah, but it's representative of a quotient of supply.
It is, and it's a technology that can scale right now. That can deliver.
Incredible how quickly it's scaling.
We built out the product there because, like, it's a complex kind of supply chain as well. So if we nail that right in terms of the tracking, it will enable other technologies as well, which is actually what we want to do, right? We want to have an MRV for all durables. If we stick to kind of maybe an approach like enhanced rock weathering, I think you brought up.
Yeah.
Some stone, by their nature, can absorb atmospheric CO2 better than others. I think olivine, basalt, and what then probably like my science team or like my science and design teams like Berta, Nikki, and others are going to slaughter me for some of it. But in general, what it does is, like, I mean, so those don't have that property naturally. So, like, how can you accelerate, enhance that process? And I think in parts is physically, like, not a stone like that, but
increasing
like
the surface area.
Increasing surface area. And then a lot is about, like, how do you apply it? Like, is it like what pH level, like water level? How do you encourage that process to be accelerated?
Yeah, using innovation and technology as a catalyst to accelerate a natural process. And that process of enhanced rock weathering is one of the, let's say, pressure release valves within the actual planetary cooling systems.
Yeah.
Right? I read a really interesting book called The Ends of the World, and it talks about these, on geological timescales, the corollaries, let's say, precursors to increases in CO2 emissions throughout history, right? We're talking prehistory across eons, and every time there's extinction level events, CO2 was the key culprit. And then after long periods of time, the geological records show that because of the mineralization and effectively higher heat trapped in the atmosphere, leading to more rain, then begat more of the rock weathering that then effectively played a thermostatic role to effectively sequestering carbon long-term, especially in marine environments. And then you start to see more plant growth involve, and then effectively a restabilization. The problem with that is those were measured in tens of thousands, typically hundreds of thousands, and maybe millions of years. Humanity doesn't even have that track record, right? So we don't have the luxury of that time. So it's really important to bring it back to the enhanced component, being the operative word, to humanity to help to accelerate these processes. So, but it's an opportunity for you to kind of give us some examples if you can.
Yes, I mean, there's players in Brazil. Like, I think with these types of projects, it's typically like, you know, the location is kind of given, like, where do you have a lot of that kind of stone. In Planet, for example, as projects in Brazil, there is kind of good places in Oman, there's good places in India. So, and I'm missing again others, like, sorry, countries if I leave you out here. But so in that sense, like, it's a type of CDR, like, where the location is pretty important. Because in the end, you need to kind of also carry the stone. There's benefit in the field. Other technologies are a bit less location bound.
Okay, can you still example?
Think, for example, direct air capture.
Okay.
Like, direct air capture, I mean, atmospheric CO2 is pretty much there. Like,
there's good mixing in the atmosphere.
So you can build them a bit like around, like, where you have enough space, where you have geologic storage,
and you have the energy inputs that are actually viable.
Right, but it gives you a bit more, like, a bit more flexibility in terms of geographic locations.
Yeah, and it's relatively early stages for those types of technologies. It's also really technically difficult. And we just give credit to the folks that are working on this, because effectively they're trying to capture a gas that forms. Well, look, it's 450 parts per million, kind of. So, but it's fairly diffuse. And so now they're trying to capture that from the atmosphere and then sequester it. It's a pretty gnarly challenge.
It is, and I love the fact, again, like, that, you know, that's where you meet actually, you know, scientists that have started these projects. In some cases, like, you know, ETH, yes, Switzerland, do this, and it become like a leading company. The main thing at Climeworks. And seeing also, like, you know, the improvements over time, it's wonderful. I would like to give them also a shout, or direct air capture and Climeworks. Actually, I think that was probably the technology that gave awareness around durable CDR overall, right?
Yeah.
Like they radiate well, like
they communicate very effectively.
Absolutely.
I think that also the standards, so like Pure Earth in particular, have done a really great job of communicating the need for the durability component. So I think it's a concert of different protagonists here that are incredibly passionate, that are advocating for really complex problems with eloquent solutions that are being developed. That's just a great story.
And I really love that this benefits the whole, durable. So it's like, it's because in the end, it starts with awareness. And that I think still in our conversations with a lot of even sustainability professionals, and I'm really acknowledging again, like carbon is this, sustainability is it.
Yep.
But even within the realm of experts, it's not always clear that durable removal is already there. Like so that we have companies that have helped kind of shed the initial light and continue doing that to kind of now have the whole portfolio visible is wonderful and needed. Mm-hmm. Other technologies, I mean, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is one. You just always have to obviously use biogenic input, right? As long as it's a fossil input, it's not removable. But in biogas plants, in waste incineration plants, if you have biogenic input and you sequester the carbon and store it geologically, that's a type of removal that is actually coming up quite a lot now. Typically, the average size of project there is much larger. Yeah, it's probably more still like a logistics topic, right? Like how do you transport, where do you store? Because these facilities typically exist already, and they're rather in an urban area, whereas the storage is not always there. So like you see that in different CDR technologies, that the challenges are slightly different.
Yeah, there's always many steps of technologies. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So give us an example of some others. So okay, so that's BECCS, DAX, biochar, and enhanced rock weathering. But it's like you said, it's a Cambrian explosion of the kind of innovation. Yeah. Right? Occurring.
Mineralization in concrete, so that you actually waste concrete is a big stream. Like you can mineralize CO2 back there and use it again in the built environment. On the ocean front, there's a lot happening. I will leave that to experts to kind of comment more. It's wonderful. Like there's different approaches that can also be ocean-based.
Yeah, I had some really great conversations just in the last week. So I went down the rabbit hole around diatoms and the potential for sequestration there. And then I spoke to a number of scientists in and around this space, just the broader blue carbon kind of component. The planet is, in terms of look at surface area, the marine environment represents a really, really large part. I think it's like 60-70% of the the surface area of the Earth is covered up by oceans. Yeah. And so and historically and through sort of the sequestration kind of hierarchy, the oceans play a really, really key component. Yep. And so there's a lot of innovation going on. There's folks that are working on, obviously blue carbon mangrove sort of systems, but also other types of algae-based systems, seagrass, and there's a lot of other really innovative sort of approaches to capturing CO2 and effectively sequestering that either in the oceans or terrestrially borrowing marine kind of ecosystem approaches. Yeah, and I think the bottom line, I think in this whole durable space, I think what we're trying to do with the whole ecosystem, and you mentioned a lot of the ecosystem partners like also Puro, like measurability, right? That we can measure it as much as possible, make it transparent, like where, like not only like how much has been removed, but also like maybe what's the value chain, where can you go visit your removed carbon. So really kind of put that on a solid base, and work on a portfolio that actually like also like when you come from a removal side and actually say, hey, I'm working on my net zero. You could take an approach and say like, hey, I just want an innovation portfolio, and I want to make sure like the ones that kind of deliver right now and scale, but I want to kind of mix it in with others that maybe deliver a bit later. Or you can say like, hey, I want it more biomass, like, or with biomass based, right? Because I have agricultural kind of value chains, or I want it inset in my operation. There's a lot of options now open, right? And that's actually the exciting thing as well. Options in terms of technologies, and I think in terms of scale, you're looking actually at a massively growing scale. And so like as we approach the 2030 targets of companies, there's non-insignificant volume now actually being built. And for that, like a big shout out to everybody actually working on CDR projects, doing it on the ground. Like also there, obviously there's like, the nitty-gritty kind of really kind of scaling this. It's a beautiful, I guess, sometimes stressful thing to do to really optimize and get it on and get to the scales that we all need. Because I mean,
we're needing 10 gigatons of climate impact. It's a daunting
challenge.
Sometimes I say, like, the growth rate overall is more than TikTok, and TikTok is one solution. And like, if you look at the compound growth rate per annum, it's a daunting challenge, but it's also like I think it's a meaningful challenge. It's one that we can start act now, and it's one that also, in terms of like industry, it's a required, beautiful, juicy opportunity that we can all get engaged now.
Great. I couldn't have said it better myself. Dominic, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to learn a lot more about the durable CDR market. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure to see you.
Congratulations to you and your colleagues in terms of the success. I know you guys have a summit over the next couple of days, helping to usher in that second wave of corporate participation. So kudos to the work that you guys are doing on DMRV, building that trust infrastructure, as you called it, and then the broader marketplace in the terms of distribution. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, and thanks to everybody involved in this market. Also, like at the summit tomorrow, it's beautiful to see
I'm looking
that
forward
whole
to it.
ecosystem that is.
Cool, man. Thank you so much for the time, buddy.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.